My name is Aubrey Shaner. I am a 2022 graduate of Columbia College Chicago. I majored in deaf studies and have an interest in early childhood development as well. Through my time at Columbia, I discovered a passion for helping families with deaf children make educated decisions and become comfortable with deaf culture. It is this passion that drives my Capstone project. What if we approached hearing parents of deaf children a little differently? Rather than treating their child's deafness as though something is wrong, as if there was something to be afraid of, what if we approached it from a place of compassion, with a heart to meet them where they're at and provide information emphasizing language acquisition as the main goal? For my project, I've created a concept for a website or company that will do just this. The goal of this project will be to provide as many resources as possible for parents all over the nation. Debunk common myths of ASL and oralism, usually spread by doctors and audiologists. Emphasize the richness of deaf culture in ASL. And to create a safe space where parents feel unashamed and empowered to ask any and all questions that will help them make choices for their child. So, why is a website like this necessary? Well, a shocking 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, most of which have no prior knowledge of deafness or deaf culture. To a parent without this knowledge, the idea of having a deaf child can feel overwhelming and daunting. Most of the information given by doctors can be extremely biased towards hearing culture, often encouraging cochlear implants first and foremost, and mentioning sign language as an afterthought rather than a serious option. Cochlear implants are certainly not the only option for a child, nor is it even the best. Other than simply being expensive, they can seriously limit a child's development when they're used alone. This leads me into what I found through my research. To begin, what is oralism? According to the Oxford Dictionary, oralism can be described as the system of teaching deaf people to communicate by the use of speech and lip reading rather than sign language. The popularization of oralism dates back to Alexander Graham Bell. Popular in hearing culture for inventing the telephone, Bell actually dedicated much of his life to eradicating sign language and pushing deaf individuals to focus solely on speech. Bell would push for the removal of sign language in residential deaf schools, as well as the replacing of deaf faculty with hearing faculty. He also established several non-residential day schools that did not allow the use of sign language. Bell's anti-sign language agenda has been met with strong hostility from the deaf community due to the oppression they faced through his oddest methods and the undermining of their culture. Common beliefs among those who support oral-only methods include the belief that ASL stunts a deaf child's ability to speak, that English is a more legitimate language than ASL, and that deaf children will be more successful in society if they know how to speak. The oral method consists of some combination of speech therapy, learning to lip read, auditory training, and assistive technology such as hearing aids or cochlear implants. So, how is language acquired in deaf children? Well, the same way it's acquired in all children. All children need a language-rich environment from birth to develop a native language. Deaf children born into hearing families that don't use ASL are immediately put at a disadvantage and can be at risk for delayed language development. When given access to ASL, deaf children learn language at the same rate as their hearing peers. More often than not, babies will even start signing before they learn to speak. How well a deaf baby, or any baby for that matter, acquires language begins solely with their parents for the first few years of life. With all that being said, What are parents to do when there's a language barrier from birth? Suddenly, they're faced with an overwhelming handful of decisions to make. Parents must decide which method of communication they want to use with their child. The doctors that surround them will typically push for oralism of some kind, despite that being a hefty price, and will rarely help parents thoroughly explore other options. Sign language, though the most accessible language for their child, can be an intimidating idea for parents. Then there's the option of bilingualism in both English and ASL. While this tends to be the most successful method, it can seem far away and unachievable for some parents who have not been exposed to deaf culture or sign language before. Parents also need to think about education for their child. There are several types of schooling methods for deaf children, and it can be unnerving weighing the pros and cons of each. There are schools for the deaf, for example, which are full of deaf culture and sign language. Many parents might believe that mainstreaming would be beneficial to help their child fit into the majority hearing society, though this can be emotionally and mentally draining for the deaf child. Some mainstream schools have special programs for deaf students that allow them to have an ASL and deaf-friendly learning environment while interacting with deaf and hearing peers alike. Lastly, parents must also decide which culture they want to raise their child in primarily, deaf or hearing. As the child grows up, they will eventually be able to choose a culture for themselves. However, there are many benefits to being involved in the deaf community from a young age. As you can see, there is a lot of pressure on parents making these decisions. The choices that parents make here will affect their child's language acquisition, education, and personal values while growing up. All of these things are not to be taken lightly, and parents can often feel a complicated mix of emotions. There's even a sense of grief that can be involved, stemming from an inability to share their native language with their child. I believe that these emotions need to be met with understanding and compassion. Professionals in the field of deaf studies and those in the deaf community know that deafness is not a bad thing. But for the parents who don't know any better, this is a delicate situation and can be shocking to come to terms with. Parents may think or say such things as, "I don't know anything about being deaf. How am I supposed to relate to my child? Do I need to learn a new language to communicate with my child? And will my child still be able to be successful in school?" I believe gentleness and compassion while handling these questions is key to helping parents have an open mind while making these crucial decisions. Why do we want to encourage and empower parents to research all of their options thoroughly? Why is it that important? Well, the danger lies in the possibility of language deprivation, or language neglect. Language deprivation occurs when children are faced with a lack of linguistic stimulation during the early years of life, namely birth to age 5. Without proper language stimulation, a child is at risk of never developing a first language. In severe cases, language deprivation can even lead to brain damage. For deaf children, spoken language is simply not accessible. This can't be changed or fixed, it's just a fact. Without the intervention of a visual language or assistive technology, deaf children are most at risk for language deprivation. Even with assistive technology like cochlear implants or hearing aids, this does not guarantee that deaf children will learn spoken language at the same rate as their hearing peers. Most research indicates that an emphasis on ASL and written English will create the most linguistically rich environment for a child. If this is the case, then why are some parents still so hesitant? It's because, unfortunately, misinformation and myths about ASL are still commonly spread. This is especially true in the speech pathology and audiology fields. Some common myths about ASL are as follows. ASL will cause speech delays. Not true. There's no proven correlation between deaf children using ASL and speech delays if they are in speech therapy. Oftentimes, it's just that the child prefers ASL. Remember, ASL is a fully accessible language to them, whereas speech is not. Implants fix deafness. This myth can be debunked quite simply. Even with an implant, the individual is still deaf. Implants do not restore hearing. ASL is not a real language. ASL is a rich, complex language on par with any spoken language. It was properly recognized as a language in 1965, though it was perfectly valid long before that recognition. Signing systems, like C1 and manually coded English, are the same as ASL. Signing systems are not languages. They're simply codes used primarily in educational settings that offer no real linguistic value. So, with all of this information, you may be wondering what comes next. How do we shift the issue? I believe there are at least 3 solutions we can focus on. The first is exactly what I've been talking about: educating parents. Educate them fully on a variety of topics. Encourage ASL and deaf culture classes. Discuss in length what it means to get a cochlear implant. Offer as many resources as is necessary for parents to feel comfortable making their own decisions for their child. Next, do what you can to break the stigma surrounding deafness. It doesn't need to be treated as a scary thing. Deaf people certainly don't see it that way, so it's time the hearing community stops as well. Lastly, the ultimate aim is for parents to become comfortable with deafness, whatever that looks like for them. Seeking deaf mentors, researching about the deaf experience, learning about deaf culture, and more. My goal is to create a website that can do all 3 of these in one place. In the following slides, I'll be showing screenshots of a conceptual website that I've created. To open the website, I want the atmosphere to be inviting. As I mentioned before, this can be an overwhelming and emotional situation for many families. Other resource websites appear far too formal, cold, or are simply government websites with no personality. I want parents to feel comfortable and relaxed while browsing the site with an easy interface that's simple to use and easy to understand. Next, I want to highlight straight away that real parents with real deaf children played a role in creating this website. This would help foster a sense of community in a situation that can sometimes feel isolating, as well as create a safe space for parents to get advice from people experiencing a similar situation. Ideally, this section would link to either a survey results page or a type of forum for parents of deaf children where they can share their experiences and resources. Following this, I've created a section all about the deaf experience. By clicking Learn More, parents could explore what it means to be deaf, debunk those myths that we discussed earlier, and discover deaf culture as well as the extent of their communication options. The heart of the website, however, would be the services page. This page would hold a link to a comprehensive database containing any sort of resource that a parent could be looking for. Ideally organized by state so they can find resources local to them, this directory would feature resources ranging from early intervention programs and audiologists to ASL classes, deaf mentors, and opportunities to connect with the local deaf community. Language begins with parents. This much we know is true. If we want to see real change happening in the lives of deaf children, we must start at the source. When reaching out to parents of deaf children, we want to always uplift the deaf experience. The goal is to break the stigma. I believe that this is done by leading with compassion, but telling the truth. Some truths may be challenging or hard to come to terms with for a hearing parent, but by letting parents know that we see and understand their struggle, we can open their mind to the world of opportunity beyond oralism and open the door for deaf children across the nation.